Lucy.
Good morning. Happy Father's Day to a great group of fathers and men, and of course women. We got outstanding women in this class. And you know, all of us are blessed that our parents were part of the greatest generation ever. They survived the Depression, they survived the war, they brought on the greatest growth of capital in the history of the world, a special group. And we got two special guys today who are going to share their story about their dads. And Lynn Moore, we know Lynn. He's not yet Lynn. Hang on. Prominent attorney, great husband, great father, great nice grandfather, and we all know that he was on the board of Phillips Theological for a number of years and was the chairman of that. So we've got him, and we've got Bill Clark, longtime pastor and the founder of Redeemer Church. Both of them are very, we love listening to these guys. So without further ado, we're going to start with Lynn, and he's going to toss it over to Bill.
Thank you, Keenan. My shirt, by the way, is a Father's Day present from last year, and it has 5 of our 6 great-grandchildren on the pictures. The 6th is not on there yet because he was only born after Father's Day. So how are we going to get... you need to do that? Oh, you had it. Go back. There we go. Well, thank you. As Keenan said, Dad was a member of the greatest generation that Tom Brokaw so named. But I think all of everybody during that time have to be considered part of the greatest generation. They died. Not all of them served in the military necessarily, but they did go through the Depression. They did go through all the sacrifices of the country coming together to make the war effort. So it's a special group of people. Now, Dad was a career Air Force officer. He was born in Claremore, Oklahoma, in a house on Moore Avenue, which is kind of between the Hammett House and RSU. He and his 8 siblings were all born there, 7 of whom survived into adulthood. He had a little bit of Cherokee heritage. His mother, my grandmother, was a first cousin of Will Rogers. So like 40% of the native-born Oklahomans, we claim some relationship with Will Rogers. Well, Dad and his family moved to Tulsa in 1927 when the Moore Funeral Home moved. Their family have been the owners and operators of the Moore Funeral Home since the Claremore days. He attended Central High School. That's where he met my mother. Then, after high school, he spent 1 year at the New Mexico Military Institute before enrolling at the University of Tulsa. In 1939, he and some buddies, I'm not sure how serious a student he was, but he and some buddies decided they'd go take the physical exam for the Army Air Corps. And the story is that a lot of the friends were football players from that time. Dad was not a football player, but he went with him. Turns out he was the only one that passed the physical. So I think he felt that was an omen or a calling, so he signed up. His initial flight training was at Spartan Aeronautics right here in Tulsa. Then he finished up at Randolph and Kelly Fields in San Antonio, Texas, and he received his wings as a bomber pilot at the end of July in 1940. The next day, he married my mother in a military ceremony with cross swords and all that. Apparently, according to my sister, My mother had been told that she could not marry my dad until he was making at least $125 a month. So I guess the second lieutenant's pay plus the flight pay he got met that test. He was initially assigned to a base in Florida, which flew B-17s. B-17s were the primary heavy bomber. They first were produced in 1935. And he went down there. He was flying a 3-week-old plane right off the assembly line, and his commanding officer said, well, you need to do a navigation training flight. Pick any city within 1,000 miles. So you can imagine he picked Tulsa, Oklahoma. And that little article down there, Tulsa pilots, bomber here, visits mother. Well, the story is that was the very first 4-engine plane to land at Tulsa Municipal Airport. I've not found any official records of that, but that's certainly the family story, and it fits with this story. But his main early career is based around B-24s. Consolidated Aircraft was approached by the Army Air Corps in 1938 and asked to manufacture B-17s. They thought, well, we can maybe do that a little bit better. And they designed and produced, with the first planes coming off the assembly line in 1940, the B-24. The B-24 was larger, faster, had a longer range, and could carry a heavier bomb load than the B-17. However, as it turned out, it was not nearly as resilient to enemy fire. It was more vulnerable, and it was more difficult to fly, particularly at low altitudes and slow speeds. Stephen Ambrose wrote a book called Wild Blue, in which he wrote about B-24 pilots. And one of those featured was George McGovern. And George is quoted as saying in the book, "Learning how to fly the B-24 was the toughest part of the training. It was a difficult airplane to fly physically, and because in the early part of the war they didn't have hydraulic controls. If you can imagine driving a Mack truck without any power steering or power brakes, that's about what it was like at the controls. It was the biggest bomber we had at the time." And also in that book, Ambrose points out, says you could always tell a B-24 pilot by his overdeveloped left forearm. And that was because they always flew in formation, or most of the time, so the pilot would have his right hand on the throttles and is trying to control the plane with his left hand. It was so difficult. That plane became the most produced plane, heavy bomber ever by any country, anywhere. There were over 18,400 planes manufactured, including about 1,000, up to close to 1,000 planes at the Douglas aircraft plant here in Tulsa. There was a British version of it called the LB-30. And the reason I bring that up is that before the war, Dad was assigned to the Ferry Command. And the Ferry Command, they would fly these LB-4s from Marchfield in California to Montreal. And in Montreal, the British pilots would then pick them up and fly them on to England. So there were a lot produced at that time. Then we approached the war. Not long after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese attacked the Aleutian Islands, which is the series of islands going southwest off of the Alaska Peninsula. In June 3rd, they attacked the base, the U.S. base at Dutch Harbor, and then in the next few days, they occupied Kiska and Attu. You can see those, I hope you can see those two islands there over on the left-hand side. The Japanese originally intended to abandon the islands before winter, but they instead chose to settle in and build airfields on both islands. They hoped that holding this American territory might have a profound negative psychological effect on the United States. And all this was going on the same time that the Battle of Midway was going on in Midway Island farther south. This marked the first time since the War of 1812 that a foreign power had occupied U.S.-owned territory. The U.S. responded by transferring a number of people up there. It got up to 100,000 personnel and building a number of bases, including one on Adak. The airfield on Adak was completed within 2 weeks of its beginning. I mean, they threw things together in a hurry. And that's where Dad was assigned. His primary missions involved attacking Japanese airfields and other military positions on Kiska. Some of the stories he told me, he didn't talk about this very much, as is true, I think, with a lot of the people who went through that experience. But he did mention at one time that they flew missions as low as 50 feet. Now, if you imagine the distance between home plate and first base on a softball field is 60 feet. So they'd be coming in low and hard. And that's particularly impressive when you understand how difficult that plane was to fly slow and low. He had one incident, he said, that came back from a mission, and he saw the belly gunner in the quarters carving a big long stick of wood. And he said, "Well, what are you doing?" Well, apparently the guns jammed during that mission. He says, "Next time my guns jam, I'm going to take this club and reach out and beat those people to death." And he had one other mission where he got, the tail gunner was saying there was a Japanese Zero approaching them, and he gave periodic reports of how close he was getting. And then finally he said, P-38 got him. So I've always had a soft spot in my heart for P-38s. This is the twin engine fighter that was really a high performance. And it was what flew escort missions for the B-24s in the Aleutians. I've got a model of a P-38 that I kept in my office for a long time. It's now at the house. And he told me that over the course of the service up there, his gunner shot down 2 Zeros. However, the most tragic story is that they were flying virtually daily missions. And one mission involving his plane and his crew was piloted by another person, and it was shot down. They were all killed. At one point, I was searching on the internet for anything about the air war, and I came across a 45-minute documentary of the air war produced by the War Department did it, but it was produced and directed by John Huston, the famous movie producer. And there, I've got 2 scenes. As I was watching it, I saw 25-year-old Captain Lynn Moore in 2 very obvious scenes. This is one when he's on the tarmac after a mission, giving a demonstration of what they went through. And then this is one when they're in a meeting, mission planning meeting. I've got links to the YouTube video that just 15 seconds, but I don't think it's Let's see if we can do it. Uh-oh. Well, I'm sorry. Okay, well, I'm not going to try and do it because, well, okay, let me see what I. Yeah, it's not working. Okay. Yeah, you just say air war in the Aleutian Islands, and there will be a number of things come up, but this particular one, I think it's got a P-40 on the opening screen. Well, as part of that research, I found a lot of different newspaper articles that mentioned Dad and specific missions he had flown on. The stories about the missions were issued by the Department of Army, and then particularly the papers in the Tulsa area would pick up Dad's name and give some background, and that's what all of these are. There's one, the biggest article there is Tulsa Flyer hits Kiska extra heavy. And then one next to it is a favorite headline of my sister's. It says, "Bombers led by Tulsan play a tune. Kiska boys goodbye." The air war ended in about end of July of 1943. The U.S. had pretty much run the Japanese out of there, but they were aided a bunch by the weather. That was just brutal weather to try and maintain a campaign. So there was a story written in the Salt Lake City newspaper about the return of from that campaign. I'm just going to read this one. It's after 11 months of flying through soupy weather. This summarizes the whole experience pretty well. After 11 months of flying through soupy weather, bombing from heights ranging from 50 to 30,000 feet over volcanic knobs of the Aleutians, strafing at deck level and skimming over icy waters, one complete Army bomber crew has returned to the States and is now at the Army Air Base, Salt Lake City. Technical Sergeant Roy Anisi and Staff Sergeant Howard Hoffman summed up the scope of their operations by saying that their job was to keep Jap raids at a minimum and to make it difficult for the enemy to maintain an air force in the Aleutians. The entire crew received the Air Medal for participation in numerous flights under adverse weather conditions. We operated on a regular schedule of 2 bomb raids a day on Kiska, explained Staff Sergeant Hoffman. Our attacks were really effective. As soon as an additional supply of Jap planes arrived at the islands, our Liberators, Lightnings, Air Cobras, and Warhawks swung into action over at the harbor at Kiska. Then it goes on to say, it's not always a matter of dropping bombs and flying back to the base. Sergeant Anisi told of one experience over Kiska in which the guns of a Zero had set fire to one of the motors, shot up the stabilizer and supercharger. Our fire extinguisher made short work of the motor fire, but we were left without controls to bank the plane in landing. However, our pilot, Captain Lynn of Tulsa, Oklahoma, holder of a Distinguished Flying Cross, set the ship down beautifully without crashing. Well, returning from the Aleutians, he was assigned to Colorado Springs and Air Force Base there, and his job was basically overseeing the deployment or disposition of B-29s and their crews for training purposes, bases all over the U.S. The Enola Gay crew was being trained at that time. I don't know whether that particular plane and that particular crew was part of what he was reviewing or not. But after the war, when he was required to get his flight time, he often flew C-47s, which is the military version of the DC-3, affectionately known as the Goonie Bird. But he told me about one time he was tried to land the C-47 in a hailstorm with a malfunctioning windshield deicer. So he had to stick his head out the window to be able to land the plane. You know, those C-47s, you could open the window. And he got substantial ice burns all over his face. And then he reported back to the general who was assigned that particular plane. The general noticed his heavily bandaged face and shouted, "What did you do to my plane?" Then the Air Force sent him back to the University of Tulsa to complete his degree. He got a business degree there. And at that time, my sister Jane was born at St. John Hospital. He then went and spent a year with the staff of the Chief of the United States Military Mission in the United Nations in New York City. And he has a gift of a samurai sword, a Japanese samurai sword that we got, and we still have it. He then went on to University of Kansas, where he's a professor of air science, head of the ROTC. One notable aspect of that is one of his cadets was Dean Smith, who was on the 1952 National Championship basketball team, and who then, after graduating from Kansas, went into the Air Force for 2 years before coaching at the Air Force Academy and then going to North Carolina. From there, we went to, they were still having air bases in France at that time. We assigned to a fighter, the 48th Fighter Bomber Wing in Chaumont, France. They had 3 squadrons of F-86 fighters. The thing I remember most about that is they had the Sky Blazers, which was the European version of the aerobatic team comparable to the Thunderbirds. So as a kid, we'd see them out practicing all the time. Then we spent 1 year in Germany at Ramstein, and then to Maxwell Field in Montgomery, Alabama in the 56 to 57. I was still a young kid. I didn't realize all that was going on in Montgomery at that time, but that was during the bus strike after Rosa Parks. We did see an air firepower demonstration at Eglin Air Force Base, which was part of the training. And the environmentalists wouldn't put up with that today. They had planes coming in with napalm, B-36 dropping bombs into the ocean. Then he was assigned to the Pentagon, and he took an extra tour, so he spent 6 years there so I could finish high school. So I started junior high and high school there. He didn't particularly like the Joint Chiefs because as a colonel amongst all the 4-star generals, he didn't have a whole lot of authority, but he did that for my benefit. He then retired and returned to Tulsa to go into business with his brothers and sister in the operation of the funeral home. And he managed the one at 21st and Memorial for 15 years before he died. He succumbed to high blood pressure with a aneurysm and bad kidneys. He went to Houston to be operated on by Denton Cooley. Nobody else would even operate on him because his kidneys were in such bad shape, but he did not survive that. So he died in 1978 at age 60. I think probably an appropriate topic here was his faith. He was not a regular churchgoer. I do have stories that Mother told me about he went and became baptized totally by himself. Just walked into a church and did that. And then he had one time had talked about perhaps going into the ministry. They thought, well, it has to be as an Episcopal priest because they can drink and they can be married. There was, in his war files, this bomber's prayer that I found very interesting. I don't know whether we have time to do you? Well, I'll just read a couple of the lines there at the end. It says, steady our eyes to the bomb sites. Guide thou our hands at the wheel. Give us thy steadfast courage when the zeros start to peel. There at the rim of the target, where the flak blinks row on row, not in ignorance, Father, we have been there, we know. Rises the old soul sickness, spatters the bursting black. Give us this day, good guts, sir. Lead us not into flack. Pilot and navigator, ruler of all things made, do not thy hand sustain us. How shall we be afraid? He did, I think they did join First Christian Church when they returned to Tulsa, which is where my uncle and grandfather were pretty active. But Warren Holtgren really presided at his funeral. The family had become very good friends with him. Well, because of my admiration of him and the service, I became an incredible fanatic over military planes, and I wanted to be a military pilot. I had all sorts of plans to go in the Air Force Academy, but my bad eyes thwarted that. But Dad was an ardent supporter of everything I did. He was president of the Boosters Club of my high school, got to know all the coaches. He attended many of my practices, and then was also at every game I played. He was the inspiration mainly through the person he was and how he treated other people. In his eulogy, Warren Holtgren noted that he never met a stranger. There's so many things I wish I had asked him at the time or said to him. It'll forever be an idol. And we were all proud of who he was and thankful for the legacy he provided for us. So, thank you.
Ask Reverend Clark to come up. How old was your dad when he died?
He was 60.
Oh, he's young.
And his father died at age 57 from a heart attack. So I just turned 80. I feel like I'm playing on house money.
I'm going to use this one. Thank you very much. Good. I'm sorry? Oh, okay. Going away? Very good. Thank you. Is that all right? Okay. I don't have any good photographs. Well, I've got maybe one of my dad. I don't know. Do I? Okay, great. My name is Bill Clark, and on this Father's Day, I'm very much appreciative of our stories kind of connecting. My dad was a private pilot, but he was never in the Air Force or Air Guard. Dad was 15 when the war started, World War II. And so he was too young on that end. And then by the time the Korean War happened, they'd already, his wife and my older brother was born. And so he missed that war too. And I always wondered kind of why Dad was despondent about the fact he didn't go to war. He would have wanted to do his duty, but he never was called to do so. So I'm going to bring my father's life into some sort of three-dimensional quality here.
Dad's been gone a long time, way over 20 years. He had Parkinson's disease, which was diagnosed when he was just 38 years old. He and I were riding horses on our little farm, and a snake came up and bit the horse. And Dad was a lot more concerned about the horse than he was me or himself, actually. But Dad fell to the ground, and his hand was trembling. And that was just the first sign of Parkinson's disease. It was a tough time for him. Dad died at 69, 70 years old with a very courageous approach to life. Dad was a petroleum landman as well as a farmer and rancher. And he loved to spend his days on the porches of farmers in southern Oklahoma. He worked for Sun Oil Company. His job was to talk to farmers and lease their land for drilling. And the truth is, Dad just mostly enjoyed talking about horses, but he would get some activity done that way anyway. Dad was one of the guys in this life who was really tough. I don't know if you showed his picture of him. I don't think you did. I don't think I brought one, but then I guess you wouldn't show it. My dad grew up in a godforsaken part of the world. If you've ever been to the Texas Panhandle place, northern part of the Texas Panhandle, in a place called Derazette, Texas, it's not the end of the world, but you can see it from there. It was a really difficult place to live. Really difficult. And Dad grew up in Derazette, Texas with 4 siblings, well, 3 siblings other than himself, 2 sisters and 2 very difficult, deprived parents. My grandfather was kind of a mess. When we would go see him in later years, he had gotten a little less messy, but he was, he was just a mess. And my first grandmother was a real mess. And one day, so I'm telling you the good, the bad, and the ugly of my family. This guy has a great heroic story. I don't have that. So one day, Dad was at school, his siblings were at school. This is a true story. They got home and their mother had left a note saying she was leaving. Well, they kind of, it was a dust bowl. It was a miserable place to live. Her husband was a miserable guy. The kids were probably miserable too. And life was just hard in the Texas Panhandle in the middle of the Dust Bowl. It was just not pleasant. Dad kind of was the one of the 4 that really raised the bar, but it was a rough time. Anyway, she left after a one day's discussion with the Fuller Brush salesman. I'm not kidding you. The Fuller Brush salesman came by from about 9 o'clock till about 3 o'clock before the kids got home, and he convinced her she was in the wrong marriage. And away they went, and that was something of a shock for my father and his siblings. It was not a pleasant time. They lived in a really poor house in the thick of the Dust Bowl. Things were bad. Things were tough for people back then. It was a hard life in the top of the Texas Panhandle. The Dust Bowl was the last straw for my dad's mom. They later reconciled. They really did. And the kids all kind of understood that her home was not a pleasant place to be, but it was still hard on all of them. It was kind of funny in a way. My dad married my mom probably about 19. They stayed together their whole lives. They were a wonderful couple together. They had 1 marriage. The rest of the 3 had in total together 10 marriages. Life was hard in those days. The physical realities of the farm life were pretty tough. And Dad was a pretty tough guy. But I could tell you stories that are pretty too gruesome about what they would do with cattle who were sick and needed to be put down. Well, the bottom line is Dad had to do the job. It was not pleasant. All of this is a little grim, but actually, once Mom and Dad married in Amarillo, Texas, we had myself and my brother my brother was older than me by 4 years. We had a good growing up in Ardmore, Oklahoma, where Sun Oil had put him to buy leases. We lived pretty well. We lived on a little farm. Dad loved the farming business, so we got 120 acres outside of Ardmore, and we watched cattle being birthed and horses being birthed. And we were at church every Sunday unless somebody was having a baby, and that would be the somebodies in the family. We lived really well. Every summer we would go to Colorado to cool down. And we'd drive in the car from Ardmore, Oklahoma, all the way to western Colorado. We never stopped, except for the times we stopped in a place that we will never go back to ever again. I'm allergic to it. I can't. I've been to Colorado a few times, Laurie and I have, and I just won't stop in Walsenburg, Colorado, because I remember the day we got there, and we were really excited to have lunch. This was a big deal for my brother and I. We were hungry. We'd started real early in the morning from Ardmore, and we got to Walsenburg, Colorado. Anybody ever been to Walsenburg, Colorado? Oh, good. Well, there's a diner there that we went to. And that diner, well, first of all, the food wasn't any good, but that we never got the food, so we didn't really know that. We had been there an hour and 15 minutes, and my dad had a lot of good qualities, but patience wasn't one of them. So after an hour and 15 minutes, he rolled up his sleeves, told the server and the manager that he was prepared to wash dishes, and if he would just get me some food. And they said, we don't do that. We don't have patrons, wash dishes for their meals. Dad says, well, then I want my meal. Well, you're not from here, and we put you toward the end of the line a little bit. And Dad says, I'm washing dishes. So he did. My dad rolled up his sleeves and entered the kitchen and started washing dishes. Finally, they handed some little snacks to us and said, if you'll just leave, this is the mentality of my dad. If you'll just leave, we'll go. So we did. We slinked out of this restaurant in Walsenburg, Colorado, strangers from another place. And then Dad had to finally end it by kicking the newspaper rack because it didn't give him a 5-cent newspaper. He had a little bit of a temper. So then he also had to go to an emergency room because he broke his toes. It's called juju. It comes back to you if you're not careful. Dad began to continue to mature. He was a wonderful guy in many ways. My mother, by the way, was very pretty, with red hair, replete with vanity and lots of social graces. She was a class act. I don't know how Dad got her, and I don't know why she stayed. I grew up really fast. I grew up very tall. By 14, I was close to 6'6". Finally, I stopped growing, which was good. But Dad really became a basketball enthusiast, and he watched me play, and that was a real bond between us. My mother was kind of indifferent about it, but she got into it after a while. The good news was that Dad, despite of his illness, the Parkinson's disease, time began to mellow for him. We were active in a Presbyterian church in Ardmore and then in Norman when we moved for Sun Oil Company again. Dad was, despite his illness, a guy who was capable of mellowing and being kind and forgetting some of the memories of his own very dysfunctional childhood. For some reason, I remember our meals together, which were great with Mom's cooking ability. She was a fantastic cook. Our conversation was usually around politics and horses, a good combination, but it's kind of boring after a while. My dad died, 25 years ago. Mom made it to her early 80s. Dad loved horses, hard work, in that order. Even though he should have been a fan of President Roosevelt because people in the Dust Bowl were generally helped by him, for some reason he had a real dislike for President Roosevelt. And at every dinner, his name would come up. And I always wondered, why do we dislike this Mr. Roosevelt guy? The public seemed to like him. And I figured that out later. Dad just didn't like him. My dad was one of those reserved people who was really quite tough. And he just didn't like getting help from other people. That was his issue. He just didn't like getting help from others. Whether that's good or not, I'll let you be the judge. Otherwise, my dad loved the Oklahoma Sooners football team. He loved his kids. He loved his wife. And though affection was not really given to the kids because Dad didn't want to spoil us, we actually realized at some point he kind of likes us. And he just won't be one to say it. All I know is I'm never going to have a meal in Walsenburg, Colorado. It doesn't matter how hungry I am. I'm going somewhere else besides Walsenburg, Colorado. That's our story. May you have great memories of your own fathers. Thank you.
Other than, oh yes, can you hang on? Any other questions? What's the name of what?
I don't know, and I have not been through, I have an aversion to Walsenburg, Colorado after that previous experience. So I don't remember the name of it. I just know if I drive by it, I speed up and I'm getting out of Walsenburg. Say that again, I'm sorry. Oh, really? In Walsenburg? Probably the same one. Probably the same one. We just avoid it and have it as another memory. Any other questions about life in those years? Dad was 16 or 15 when the war started. It really bothered him. It really strained me to think about it. Dad, you wanted to go to war? Well, all the men really wanted to participate and do something for their country. And he just was in that one little group that too young for World War II, too old for Korea with having a baby. So we never experienced that. Yes. He did not enter the ministry. He was a devout Presbyterian. He did see me enter the ministry and Dad was not an effusive person. He never said something to me except maybe after a basketball game, boy, you played great, and then that was it. But as a minister, he kind of wondered, I think he wanted me to be a cowboy. And I didn't like cows, and I didn't, and the work was too hard, so I never became a cowboy. But he did see me go into the ministry, and he participated in that some. I'm sorry? Probably so. I ran for the legislature because I knew there was this guy named Roosevelt who was the president. And my dad, well, he never took the Lord's name in vain, but on some moments he would cuss. Usually it was over a horse or a cow, but Franklin Roosevelt did it for him too, and I'm not sure why. And I'm sure there's some wonderfully good Democrats here who think that's absurd. It was, and I just have to cop to it, it was absurd. He just didn't like him. Any other questions or thoughts or your own stories, anybody else? Well, we all have some memories, and those are some of mine. Thank you very much.